And I'm really pleased to introduce our first panel, whose work is actually really dear to my heart. Another lifetime ago, I delved into cookbook collections like the one we will hear about with this panel at Guelph University. And I have, like our panelists, cooked in historic kitchens and finally ended up writing Out of Old Ontario Kitchens in Guelph, 1978. And I've strayed away from food since then, but after this conference, I think I'll be pulled back into it. Happily, our panelists have taken the study of cookery in new directions through the preservation of written culinary history and through hands-on public demonstration of cookery in historic kitchens and the subsequent, actually, research results of that hands-on work. Their dedicated and creative efforts are, I think, so important in showing women's kitchen work as a skilled and vital part of everyday life in the past. And I think you will really appreciate the passionate and very personal nature of these presentations. So what I'm going to do is introduce all our panelists right up at the front, and then each one will speak and follow one another. So our first speaker, closest to me, is Michelle Goodridge, who holds a Master of Arts in Public History from the University of Western Ontario and is currently pursuing her Master of Library and Information Science degree at Western. Michelle has worked at the University of Guelph Archival and Special Collections for the past 18 months and is currently responsible for cataloging cookbook donations. She has a keen interest in culinary history and maintains a cooking blog, which we're all going to have to look at. In her presentation, 13,000 Cookbooks and Counting, the culinary collections at the University of Guelph, she will give an introduction to an excellent primary resource for women's history. Fiona Lucas, the next in line, worked as a culinary historian with the City of Toronto Museums for 23 years. Currently, she is the coordinator of volunteer management for Toronto Special Events. She holds a Master's of Canadian History with an emphasis on kitchen material culture and food history. And in 1994, she co-founded and served as president of the Culinary Historians of Ontario, which is now called Of Canada. Her first book was Hearth and Home, Women in the Art of Open Hearth Cooking, which was published in 2006, and she is now working on a scholarly reprint of the 1854 Female Emigrants Guide, which forms the topic of her presentation, Culinary History, Catharine, Parr, Traill, and Me. And now for the presenters from Fort York National Historic Site, Historic Foodways Program.
Move the mic just a little closer or something on your voice. We've got competing noises from the back.
Okay.
Thank you.
Does that sound better? You're getting an echo.
Yeah. It's okay. Go for it.
I can't do much of it. Bridget Wranich, who's the next in line, is a program officer at Fort York and coordinates the Foodways program. She's worked in museum education since 1986. She's also a co-founder of the Culinary Historians of Canada and currently is a member of their advisory board. Maya Sangster is a retired school teacher and since 1996 lead cook of the Volunteer Historic Cooks at Fort York. An honorary member of the Culinary Historians of Canada, she developed programs such as Reading Cookbooks as Social History, Mad for Marmalade, Crazy for Citrus, in partnership with Fort York. As a member of the Association for Living History, Farms and Agricultural Museums, she has delivered several workshops, the most recent being 400 Years of Puddings. Like Maya, Elizabeth Baird is a volunteer historic cook at Fort York. She's a well-known cookbook writer. Many of you probably have her cookbooks in your home. And beginning in 1974 with Classic Canadian Cooking, and her most recent with Rose Murray, Canada's Favorite Recipes. Now retired, she was a food writer for Toronto Star and Toronto Sun, food editor of Canadian Living magazine, co-host Canadian Living Cooks on the Food Network. And I am really looking forward to these speakers, and I'm sure that you are too. So, please.
Good morning. Can everybody hear me? All good? Okay, perfect. Thank you all for being here so early. My name is Michelle Goodridge, and I am a library associate at the University of Guelph Archival and Special Collections. And I'm here today to talk to you about what our culinary collection consists of and what sort of primary resources you may want to use or consider for research. So basically my presentation is broken into 5 sections. I'm going to talk about quick collection facts, kind of giving a broad overview of what we have. I'm going to talk about key donors that we have had to our collection, and also some culinary collection highlights, particular books or publications that I think are noteworthy. As well, I'm going to talk about MacDonald Institute, which is one of the founding colleges of the University of Guelph. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about current and past research that have been done with our collections. So a brief overview of what we have. To date, we have over 13,000 cookbooks. These cookbooks include Canadian publications and international. We also have a rich assortment of community cookbooks that span all the provinces. We have handwritten cookbooks. We have cookbooks that are cut and paste, people putting in articles written in newspapers. So we've got a fairly wide variety of things, and the time period we're covering is approximately 1700 to present day. And that is a picture, in case you're curious, of one of these stacks in our archival and special collections rare book room, and that is probably a fifth of what we have. So to talk a little bit about some of our key donors, this isn't an exhaustive list. This is just a list of some people that I'm sure you know. So we've got the collection of Una Abramson, the Edna Stabler collection, Jean Paré, the Taste Canada Awards, Helen Gagan, Rose Murray, Margaret Oliver, Norma Bidwell, Margaret Fraser, and as I say, many more. These donations are both publications produced by these authors and also those collected. So for example, the Jean Paré collection, which we recently acquired, is 6,000 books that she personally owned. And we just received another 1,000. I don't know where she found them. But now we have 7. So, as I said, it's a growing collection and growing quite rapidly, in fact. So some collection highlights. I'm sure you're all aware of Elizabeth Driver's work with several books, including Culinary Landmarks. And this is a great place to start with your research. We have 2 copies, and we were fortunate enough to have her use some of our collection in her book, and we are referenced. This book is basically a primary resource for looking up what was going on in Canadian culinary history pre-1949. And if you haven't seen it, I highly suggest you do. It's a very impressive book. So I'm going to go through some highlights within our collection that I think are particularly interesting. The first one is Hannah Robertson's The Young Ladies' School of Arts. This book was published in Edinburgh, and we have a first and second edition. The first edition was published in 1766. So just to kind of talk about its importance, I kind of grabbed a little snippet off the National Library of Scotland's website, but they noted its particular importance due to its rarity. There is only one first edition in all of Scotland, and that's where it was published. So for us to have one is fantastic, and we do have a very large Scottish collection, the largest outside of Scotland. And it's of particular interest because they wrote her name. I think that's very interesting, Mrs. Hannah. And that is a picture of the title page of the book. Now, just to kind of talk about some of the older books, I went around and tried to find what the oldest book we have is, and it's a little bit tricky. Early printing doesn't necessarily tell you exactly when something was made. So I went with the one that had the date that I could read. It would be Robert Smith's Court Cookery book from 1723. This is part of Una Abrahamson's collection. And as well, I picked the London Complete Art of Cookery, and that's from 1797. I picked that one just because I like the picture. But you kind of get an idea of what sort of holdings we have. So it's not just current, we span international. And these are of importance because immigrants come into Canada, obviously a large proportion of them are from the UK, and those sorts of books made a big impact on our culinary history. So they're definitely a good starting place for research. This is a particular favorite book of mine. It's not particularly fancy, but it is a handwritten cookbook from 1910. And if you are to look at it, there are recipes and drawings from the author's children throughout the book, which I find very, very cute. And these sorts of books, we have several, and they can tell you so much about culinary history. They can tell you when, imported goods are affordable and accessible. They can tell you shifts in cooking and trade. They can talk about nutrition, like what were people eating at the time, what were people actually making, because this person wrote that recipe down. I find that out of all the cookbooks, to me, these are some of the most important ones. Now just to touch on some of our, the staples of Canadian cooking, I guess. We have a very extensive blue ribbon cookbook collection. We have, I believe, don't quote me, 8 editions and counting of that publication, and there were several. We also have the Home Cookbook, which is attributed to be the first Canadian community cookbook published in Canada by the ladies of Toronto and chief cities and towns of Canada. And we have a first edition of that book, as well as subsequent editions. And these are very important. The Home Cookbook was published in, And another important cookbook that we have is The Cook Not Mad. It's considered to be the first Ontario publication, and that was in 1831. So we do have some of the, I suppose, heavy hitters of early culinary history. Also important are community cookbook collections. I touched on the Home Cookbook being the first, but we have so many others that, I could spend all afternoon talking about them. These cookbooks, they're church community cookbooks, they're for fundraising, some of them are self-published, and they offer so much information beyond the recipes themselves. You get the author's names, you get a list of board of directors, congregation lists. These are, a wealth of knowledge beyond culinary history. Some people use them for genealogy research. So they are an important and large component of our collection. And just so that in case you can't see what the pictures are, the bottom one is the Home Cookbook. That's a 50th edition. And this one on the right was just a random First United Church cookbook. We also have a very large pamphlet collection. We don't have an exact count, but we're talking into the 2,000 to 3,000 range. So these are important, because they're appliance manuals, they're cookbooks geared, towards specific products and uses. And I don't know if any of you watch Mad Men, but every time I look at them, that's what I'm thinking. Like, these are, advertisements for this time period, and it's telling you something about the society and the culture of the time. Like, who are they marketing these to? Who appears on the front page? What are they saying about nutrition? Are they telling you, that butter is incredibly healthy and you should use it all the time. Like what is it that's going on in these books that can kind of tell us a little bit about the time period? On the next slide, I've picked a couple of my favorites. I mean, as soon as I showed my husband the 51 Ways to a Man's Heart, he got mad that I don't own it. But as you can see, this clearly says something about this time period. And I really like the one on the right, not just because it's beautifully colored and illustrated, but it kind of tells you a little bit about that time. Like, I mean, there's a man in the kitchen, so that's interesting. He is Duncan Hines. I mean, that's what the book's about. But it's grilling, baking, and barbecuing. And I'm sure all of you are aware of the grilling and barbecuing phenomenon in the 1950s. So, I mean, these books are so much more than just recipes, and you can pick up so much information off of them. And I highly suggest you come look at them. So, along with having, incredibly old, incredibly rare books, we also have new and current. The Tees Canada Awards, which I'm sure you're quite aware of, happens every year, and we receive a donation of every single book submitted. So I mean, that's quite a large